thank you for being a part of our show. I'm so excited for everyone to see your work. But as is our custom, I'm going to ask you a few questions first so that you can share some of your thoughts with everyone who's here. So first
Mhm.
of all, do you think of yourself as an illustrator or an artist?
I Overall, I believe I'm an artist because I've participated in many mediums. So although I did study illustration in college, I would say I'm an artist.
And that's very much what I would say. But it's an interesting, the question is interesting to me because of my background as a designer, but I see so much design in your work. So
Mhm.
it's a really nice marriage of planning, as people will see, and execution.
Okay.
So to the question of your Judaic heritage and background,
Yeah.
did is this something that was intensely part of your life, or is this something you came to later and started integrating into your art?
Well, I mean, I always, from the very youngest memories, identified as a Jew, and but it wasn't until I met my husband and we were going to get married that I delved into it more and more. And then even further, once I had children and wanted to make sure they had a Jewish education and had good self-esteem about being Jews.
Okay, so that tells me a bit about it, and I know it does make appearance in your work, and we're going to look at that. Now, what I want to ask you is, have you always been drawn to maps?
That's a great question. I mean, before GPS, you really couldn't, if unless you were going to the corner store, you couldn't really leave in Los Angeles, which is so sprawling, you really couldn't leave your house without consulting a map. So I think maps give you a sense of place, of where you are in relation to others, to other places. And then I was just remembering recently, every classroom I ever had as a child, we had a globe in the classroom. So that really gives one awareness of where we are on the planet. So yeah, I love maps, and you'll hear more about the Thomas Guide later.
All right. Well, with that, we can get right to the imagery. Let me share the screen. So can you see the share screen?
Yeah. Mhm.
You
Yes.
can see? Great. Okay, let's get started.
Okay.
So here I think we're looking at a little snapshot of your childhood. Tell how you got involved into fabrics.
Sure. So, I was gifted this Revlon doll, who came with a giant can of spray net hairspray. And I mean, I just love this doll. And I also love Barbie. So I'm one of the original Barbie girls. And my mom's friend made me an entire wardrobe for the Revlon doll, and with such precision. She was a real dressmaker, and I just studied those outfits for hours and dressed and undressed, and that prompted me to want to learn to sew. So I told my dad I wanted a sewing machine. I'd been sewing by hand, and he said, well, I'll get you a used one, and if you take to it, I will buy you a new one. So for the sewers out there, I'll just mention the names. The first machine was a white rotary. And then my first new machine was a Kenmore from Sears. Then I migrated to the Elna, which is Scandinavian, the Lotus, which is very, very portable. And then I got a larger Elna. And now today I'm using a Juki, and I have two of them, and they're just a powerhouse machine. They never quit. So it was
Well,
through dolls and homemade doll clothing.
I'm in awe, first of all, that you can operate these things. And I know that I have I have confessed to you that if a button comes off a shirt, I have to basically throw it out. So I'm very impressed with your capacity to run all these machines and have them do the amazing art that you do. Now, this piece, I believe, is one of your earlier pieces, and it's
Yes, so when I was at Art Center at that time, majoring in illustration, everything was about photorealism and graphite. And as a senior project, we were to do a series, and I completely went out of the box by I had taken photos in Big Sur. I took the poetry of Robinson Jeffers. I used batik and embroidery and calligraphy, and still I can't even believe I did this, but I did my series, and the class got to vote on their favorite, and I got that honor. And I was just shocked, really shocked. But, you know, okay, so that speaks to working outside the box.
And I think that the integration, this is really a foreshadowing of the work to come, the way you integrate so many different media here with the text and the overlaying and the hand stitching. It's really foreshadows where you're about to head to. But this
Well,
is something different. Tell us about this.
yeah, so these are some early pen and ink illustrations, and when I pulled them out, I saw this that there's the similarity is pattern, that there's pattern spelled out. And then later on in the presentation, the middle one is Watts Tower, which is a uh, uh, let's see, an unusual structure in Los Angeles. And so this is, I mean, decades ago, I was already drawn to the shapes and pattern of the Watts Towers. And I do love pen and ink. So these are just very early things just to give you a taste.
And here we begin your journey.
Mhm.
So what called you, what made you start taking waistbands off of jeans, and what were you creating here?
Yes, so I've always been a quilter, you know, started sewing at 10, and I wanted to do something again out of the box with a quilt. So all these denim pieces are from my family's used jeans. And I think I found a book, and I can't find the name of it now, that was showing fabric collage of fish, which are so playful. And so this is some of the series, and they ended up being framed and shown at Harbor UCLA Medical Center in Los Angeles. But they did a remodel and just added art everywhere, which was such a gift for anyone who has to spend time in the hospital.
So, and what called to you about the fish? It was it just the
Well,
playful.
they can be very whimsical and very open to interpretation with the shapes. And they don't have to be photorealistic. I mean, you look at them, you see, oh, it's a fish, you know, and then just, I guess it's like building a mosaic with fabric.
So is this one of your first large size pieces?
Yes, this is the largest piece I ever did, which I constructed on my bedroom floor, and it's very heavy, and it's all jeans. And on the left, it was a gallery in Palos Verdes where I lived. I thought it was going to hang horizontal, but it totally makes sense to hang it vertically because it takes up a lot of space. And then eventually I ended up donating it to an art and craft center in San Pedro, which is the southernmost part of Los Angeles. And that's how they hung it there.
It's very, I love the sort of harmonious color palette that
Oh,
you
thank you.
gives a
Yeah,
lot
and
of.
San Pedro is a fishing port, so that was a perch from there. So that's why it ended up there.
So I know that these are small works.
Mhm.
Why did you develop this series of small works? Did it have
Yeah,
to do
so
with travel?
this is my early entry into combining my photography with my quilting with cartography. So these are all representative of Palos Verdes. And so like I would just say I'm getting my feet wet here with what I want to do.
So this is beautiful, and this is really one of the first times you assembled really a sort of a collage that created a sense of place. So talk
Yes.
about that.
Yes, so this was my home in Palos Verdes, or an interpretation of. And while I was trying to put maps together with fabric, I came to learn about my first mentor, Valerie Goodwin, who wrote a book called Art Quilt Maps. And I was fortunate enough to go to Lake Tahoe, where she was having a workshop at Art Quilt Tahoe. She flew all the way from Florida, and living in Los Angeles, I'm like, I got on a plane with my sewing machine and learned techniques and design and how to really put my thoughts together in a structure. So this is representative of the house we lived in for 32 years. You'll see an aerial view. You'll see of the streets on the top. You'll see the peak of our garage. You'll see in the lower left-hand corner an aerial view of the home itself. And then we were very fortunate to be able to see the sunset from our backyard and the purple agapanthus flowers that were put in front of it. So this is layering, and also the flowers were photos I took, and then I print them with my inkjet printer onto cotton and cut them and then embellish them with stitching.
That's one of the things that I love about your work is that you're everywhere at once. And that's what I was trying to allude to in terms of creating a mirage. And the basically it's greater than the sum of its parts, because as your eye goes from one area to the other, it creates a real impression. And that's one thing I love about it. So now you're getting
Yes,
serious here. Okay, here
yes.
you're getting to
So,
it.
if you know anything about Los Angeles, or I don't know if there's other parts of the country that have this, but there's something called the Thomas Guide Book of Maps, and Rand McNally bought them, and it was just a very thick spiral bound book that had a small quadrant of every section of the county. And so I came up with the idea to do a series based on the Thomas Guide. So this represents the page in the Thomas Guide where LAX is. So you can see the landing strips in the center, and then the theme building, which is iconic. And I threw in some TWA jets, which, are no longer in service. And so I took the aspect ratio of the Thomas Guide and the aerial view and just mapped it out and started layering on top of that.
It's absolutely stunning. And I want to go back to something you said earlier. It sort of went by quickly, but I want to go back to, what do you mean you print on fabric? What? What can you elaborate a little bit on that?
I'm
Because
sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
it's a, what do you mean you print on fabric? Can
Oh,
you
okay.
said
So,
it before, but
yes.
elaborate a bit on that.
Yeah, so I work a lot in Photoshop and edit images, and then I can feed cotton or silk that's temporarily glued onto 8.5 by 11 paper, and feed it through the inkjet printer. And that's how you get the airplanes and other imagery.
And when you affix these to the background, how are they attached? How are they layered on?
Okay, it's a method's called fusing. So there's Misty Fuse, which is very thin, like thinner than cheesecloth. And then there's other thicker materials that you iron on. So you're using an iron and Teflon sheet, so your iron doesn't stick to the glue. And that's how we adhere it.
So this is another snapshot of
Mhm.
a place. Tell us
Yeah.
about this.
So this is the Thomas Guide view of Santa Monica, where the main landmark is the Ferris wheel. So I went out there, took photos, and the stripes you see in the blue, that's the ocean, and then there's the beach, and then the pink is the land. And most of these fabrics in the background are from men's shirts that I get at a thrift store, which they're like really excellent quality cotton. And it's a way of upcycling, if you will, existing fabric rather than buying new. So I try to do that when I can.
It's really so alive and so vibrant, where you have the mixing of the topographical image that is you're looking at in plan view, and then these three-dimensional objects that are going past your vision, and it's very dynamic. And I was very curious about this, so I got Ellen to reveal a little bit of her secret in terms of how she plans this out. So these are some of the pieces. Talk about what role these little pieces play.
Yes, so this is the background construction for Santa Monica. So there's the page from the Thomas Guide. And then you see above that my photos, which I'll scale. And then I will trace. On the left-hand side, you see pen and ink tracing. And that's how I make my patterns. So in the upper right corner, you see some sketching. What's my layout going to be? Just very, very rough. And then from there, I start assembling the pieces. The
So tell
next
us
one,
next.
yeah, this is Malibu, the Getty Villa, which is also part of, or aligned with the Getty Center, which is a massive, amazing museum in LA. And this was John Paul Getty's collection of ancient Roman and Greek sculpture and whatnot. So here you see an aerial view of the structure where the water is, the fountains. And then there's a Corinthian column, which I took a photo of, and then continued the lines through. And on the bottom, there's the water. So it's right on the, near the beach. And again, I see some men's shirts in there.
I love the stitching that is kind of winding its way through, and it's creating a continuity in the graphic. It leads your eye from one area to the other, right through the different fabrics, and that makes it incredibly dynamic with this round shape that protrudes there. But I got Ellen to reveal a little bit of the what and why, and these look like architectural drawings. Did you get these from some source?
Well, I drew these probably from Google Maps, or if you Google search for, aerial view of whatever area, you get, some of them have more definition than others. So I'm using maps, mostly from the internet, to draw and then create my patterns, my shapes, my orientation from these sketches.
Okay. Now this is more of an impression of a landscape. So tell us about this.
Yes, well, a lovely lady named Betsy Amador commissioned me to make this to hang over king-size bed, so it's as wide as a king-size bed. And Betsy used to live in Palos Verdes, but then moved to Redondo Beach, which is in the foreground. So this is looking from Redondo up to what they call the hill or Palos Verdes, with some beading and the sailboats, the lifeguard stand, and a pelican, and the rust color trapezoids, I think that's what they are, in the foothills. There's a zoning requirement that all the roofs have to be red clay tiles. So yes, it is very impressionistic. And the coolest thing about this project was when I was meeting with Betsy as I was leaving, and she told me that her parents were involved with the State Department, and they were living in, I think, Indonesia. Forgive me if I got the country wrong, but she goes, I have this batik fabric. And I said, can I use it? And so within the hills, the blue background with the flowers, this is from the fabric that she had from her parents. So I'm very pleased with how this turned out, and I know it's meaningful for her.
So that leads me to ask you the question, do you have rooms that you open the door and all these fabrics come falling out on you because you collect them? Or do you specifically search for fabrics when you have a particular piece?
Well, honestly, my collection's really very small. I don't have a large, master closet filled floor to ceiling with fabric. It's small. And I have shoe boxes filled with scraps by color, and then I have another sorting device in my closet by color. But it's very rare that I go looking for a specific color, but I do from time to time. But I'm very drawn to certain fabrics, so if I see something and it jives with me, like if it's graphic, map oriented, I'll grab it up.
So this is a very fascinating juxtaposition. Tell me, were you in Cuba?
I was in Cuba. My husband and I went to Havana, and I was on a bus, and we drove by this apartment building on the left, which is considered Soviet style. And I looked at it, snapped a photo, and I go, that is a quilt. It's just so geometric. And the reason for the funky colors there, like you see purple on the balcony and red, is because in Cuba, if you want to paint your house, you go to the store and they go, we have purple. And that's it. There's no Sherwin-Williams. It's just whatever they have, that's what you get. It's very, very limited resources there. So then on the right is my interpretation, and it was very fun.
So I think this is called Ellen Quilts the World, because I have a feeling that you could travel and you could bring home all of your photos and turn them into fabric masterpieces. And
Thank
so
you.
give us a sense of how big this is.
Well, I believe, let's see, it's behind me. I would say it's 24 by 36.
Oh, that's pretty big.
Okay,
That is big. Yeah.
okay.
So tell the story here of your involvement with Hearst Castle and the architect.
Okay, well, going back to like, I want to say bloom where you are planted. So now I'm transplanted from LA to San Luis Obispo County, home of Hearst Castle. And Julia Morgan was the female architect of Hearst Castle, which was very unusual back in the day. And a lot of times I'll enter shows that have themes. So the theme for this show was her story, HER story, rather than history. And I go, well, Julia Morgan, where I am, and so forth. So this was my first piece that I did of Hearst Castle, which involves in the upper right, like an illustration. I use vintage lace. The bottom with the blue is a overview of the grounds. And then you see the castle flanking Julia on either side. And then very faintly in the middle on the right-hand side and left is a compass signifying architecture.
It's a terrific homage to this woman and her work. And
Mm.
you did more pieces on the Hearst Castle, correct?
Yes, I did over 13 pieces. There's another building that she built in the area called the Monday Club, which, well, Julia designed it. And somebody saw this, somebody from the Monday Club saw this, and long story short, I ended up donating this piece to the Monday Club, and they had it framed with preservation glass, etc. So it hangs in the entryway there now, which started my relationship with the Monday Club, a very nice philanthropic group.
So do you recommend that these pieces be framed with the fabric under glass, or do they hang like a hanging on a rod?
Both, okay, both. Now, if there's a lot of depth or texture in a piece, and if you put it behind glass, you would want some distance. You would want at least a quarter of an inch away. But I would say most of my pieces, I put a sleeve on the back and a dowel stick and they hang on the wall. But it's really up to the who's ever hanging it, whatever they desire.
So this is part of that series?
Yes, yes. So again, they're very interpretive. In order to build the castle, which is high on a hill, they had to build a pier to bring all the materials. So on the left, you'll see the pier and the palm trees. And on the right, this is based on a photo I found of the castle under construction. And so I partnered with the Monday Club and held a online art auction to benefit the Monday Club. And that was a very good partnership. I've been doing quite a bit of that with nonprofits.
So, and what is this one on the right? They're both interpretive portraits of
Yeah,
the castle.
right. The one on the right is based on a photo of the castle under construction. And so it's a bit of a mosaic. And then I used hand embroidery for the palm trees and just a lot of fun.
Tell me, when you begin undertake, you showed us some of your, well, actually, we have this coming up. We have some of the background here.
Mhm.
So this is how you approach it by looking at the architectural drawings. Is that two images there?
Yes, so I'll take photos and then do tracings and then scale them. And that on the right is another piece which was inspired by another one of my mentors, Natalia Korover. And so there's a lot of different techniques on this one with fabric paint and I call it thread drawing. So in the center where you see the rust colored building, I call it thread painting. And then in the bottom with the columns, that is the pool there. I'm just blanking on the name. I want to say Venus, but it's not. It's just a remarkable structure. The teal is one of my favorite colors. So It's all spelled out. It's a lot of it's a lot going on. I realize that. It's a lot of different impressions of the castle.
No, it's a lot going on because if you've ever seen, we should actually have had a photo of the castle because there
Mm,
is a lot going on there. I've
yeah,
actually been there, and it
yeah,
is like a kaleidoscope of kind of architectural um, pastiche, sort of different styles. It's
yeah.
very inconsistent. It's got Spanish and in some areas, and then it has this sort of colonnade. And so you've succeeded in really doing an interpretation of what this place is like to actually to be there because your eye is drawn to all different details.
Well, thank you. Yeah, primary architecture is what they call Moorish, which makes
Okay,
sense
right.
with the window shape.
And Moorish is an allusion to us Moroccan or architecture that comes from that part of the world, of course, with the arches and the peak domes. So it's an interesting transplant into California.
Yeah, thank you. A friend of mine, Mary, had given me two saris years and years and years ago, which I was like, I can't cut into these. And finally, I'm like, yeah, what am I waiting for? And so on the top, where you see the gold and the brocade, and then also in the roof line in the center, I was able to cut into the fabric and use it. So it was certainly appropriate for this location.
People must get nervous when you come up to them at a party and go, gee, I really like what you're wearing. You go
Well,
home.
my husband, kids, he has two shirts left in his closet.
So now we come to some of the Judaica that you've done.
Yes.
Tell us about this very, very appropriate for this time of year piece.
Hmm. So in San Francisco, which is like a 3-hour drive from where I live, the Jewish Contemporary Museum, which is completely stunning, was having a Jewish textile exhibit. I had to go, and I did. And they were just garments from all over the world, places I didn't know there were Jews, China, India, and so forth. So I saw this prayer shawl on the right, silk, and just was like, oh, I think I need to make a prayer shawl. Well, my dressmaking skills are not what they used to be or maybe ever were. So on the left, this is Rosh Hashanah. This was going to be a prayer shawl, and it became a wall hanging, which is fine. And so, I'm trying in the shofar with the Torah, and the Hebrew is the first words in the Torah, which I painted with metallic paint. So there it is.
So this piece on the right, is this a piece that you made or is this a piece that
Oh,
inspired
no.
you?
No, that's from the museum.
That's from the
That
museum.
was, yeah, it's from the 18th or 19th century. Just completely stunning.
Well, I really appreciate the monochromatic palette that you used here because Rosh Hashanah is a time of contemplation. And so you've really resisted from going all, multi-theme colors and really
Mm,
create something that is very satisfying to,
mm,
to contemplate. So I
thank
think you did a lovely job there.
mm.
But now we see a
Yes.
little bit of excitement going on. Talk about Shavuot.
Yeah, so Shavuot is the celebration of the spring harvest with wheat, and it also is celebrating um, the, help me here, Shelley, Mount Sinai, the Torah being brought to Mount Sinai, correct?
Well, the Torah being the Ten Commandments being given to the people of Israel.
Okay, so I did quite a bit of Photoshop work here, and the background, I put the two sides together in Photoshop, and I had it printed by a company called Spoonflower that prints images onto fabric. And from there, I embellished the wheat on the left with gold strands. And you can see Mount Sinai on the upper left, and then the Torah on the right. So,
In here.
yeah,
So is this one piece, like
yes.
one art piece, or am I looking at two?
It's one piece.
Okay,
So
and
it was one Photoshop file that I sent away to be printed on fabric.
and then you sewed on top of it.
Correct, yes.
And you really, are there fibers hanging off of this?
Yeah, it's three-dimensional, so to simulate the wheat.
It's very, very beautiful. How
Thank
big
you.
is it?
I would say it is maybe also 36 by 24. That seems to be my configuration. I lean towards.
That's your happy size. Now, this is incredible because I think you're doing some experimenting here.
Yes, so Sukkot is the celebration of the harvest in the fall, just coming up. And the pomegranate is certainly found in Israel, but is also very plays a big role in many cultures, symbolizing fertility, birth, and so the pomegranate is available to me in the fall. So I took the pomegranate, cut it in half, and started printing on different types of fabric. So that is why the colors differ so much, because of whatever chemicals or components are in the fabric. And then when I run out of pomegranate juice, I would paint red paint onto the pomegranate and continue printing. So then I assembled it all with individual pieces. And on the right-hand side, this is another technique that I love. Although it looks like it's crocheted, it's actually done on the machine. And for those of you who are sewers, put the feed dogs or the teeth down, and then you can move the fabric around as you like. And there's a fabric called Solvy that I did this on, and every thread has to touch each other, of course. Then you put it in warm water and the Solvy disappears and you're left with what looks like crochet.
So are you saying that this is sewn with your it's free sewn with the machine?
Correct.
And are you doing this as a painter would, kind of in being inspired in the moment, and
Mhm.
or do you know exactly what you're doing here?
I would say I know the size of the pomegranates, but the rest is just complete free motion sewing.
So now these little squares that I'm looking at here, are you saying these were individually done and then assembled into a quilt?
Correct. Yes.
Is there a batting or a sort of a filler, a stuffing in it? Is it got a thickness?
Yes. Correct. The definition of a quilt, which may be changing, is it has to be 3 layers. So you're seeing the front layer, then there's rather thin batting in between, and then a backing fabric.
So I know that I'm speaking for people who don't necessarily know how to do this, but I want to know, when you sew through it here, are you sewing through all the layers?
No, good question. Some people do. I rarely do that. I'm usually only sewing through the top layer and the batting, and then later on I put what's called a floating back onto the back. Some people, like these master quilters, show their quilting on the back, which I would not want anybody to see mine, but it's possible.
Okay, so the pieces in a way are floating separately
Yeah.
and joined on the edges?
Pardon me?
Are they joined together on the edge, like on the border?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Well, I figured they're not
Okay,
loosely floating, just for me to wrap my head around it.
sure.
So this is incredibly interesting and powerful. And what inspired you for this?
Well, again, where I live, there's Monterey Pines, which grows in a town called Cambria, which is near the Hearst Castle, and in very specific places on the West Coast. And it looks like a pine tree turned on its side, especially when they grow near the ocean and the wind blows them. So they're very tall, and the boughs of the Monterey pine go horizontal. So this is kind of a double meeting of trees and also like an aerial view of Cambria. The green squares represent the agricultural area. And a dear friend of mine, Fern, has this hanging in her home. I just thought I'd mention her because she's so great.
Always nice to have friends that are supportive.
Absolutely.
But in your case, Ellen, I would be happy to take a piece and hang it in my home. So
Oh,
if you're looking for people.
okay.
So tell me about what this is, because it looks in a way familiar in terms of this stitching style that you have on top.
Right, right, right. So the one on the left is still part of the Judaica series, the Kiddush, and the one on the right is Yom Kippur, and I'll explain. The method is called ice dyeing, and what one does is scrunches up the fabric or like put rubber bands like you would with tie dyeing around different shapes, lay it in a basin, cover the entire piece with ice cubes, and then take fabric dye in the form of a powder and sprinkle the powder on top of the ice cubes. And as it melts, you get a surprise. This is what you get. This is the outcome, and I just love it. I love the spontaneity. And because the one on the left signifies Kiddush, where we drink wine, usually red, and then I did the same method with stitching to create a bunch of grapes on the left. And then the one on the right, um, basically Yom Kippur is the when we atone. It's a community-wide atonement over the past year. And so within each circle is a representation of the prayer that we say as a community during this holiday.
So I just want to ask you something, because that was very complicated what you said, and you sprinkle the dye and you put
Yeah.
ice, and is this a thing? Is this a process that you knew about, or did you invent it?
Yes, this is a thing. Ice dyeing. If you go on YouTube, you can see examples of it. And a friend of mine, Deborah Weir, taught me how to do this, and I just love it. It can be messy, and then you have to make sure you have a place to throw the colored water out when you're done. But the results are always just so fun.
Yeah, this is really spontaneous. And I love the way, in this case, where you've sort of elaborated on the grape forms. First, you've done it here in a color palette that is blending with the background, and then
Okay.
you've chosen to do this really powerful, almost neon green coming forward, and the whole thing combines to be a very powerful piece. So
Hmm,
I like it.
great. Thank you.
So now
Okay.
this one tells a story.
Yes, so in the upper, this one is called Grandpa's Crossing. So my maternal grandfather, as a teenager, left the Ukraine, I believe Odessa, made his way to Rotterdam, where he boarded a ship called the Uranium, which is what you see in the foreground, and made his way to Ellis Island in the center and became an American citizen. And in the upper left, you'll see him. He was sent over to the foxholes in France to fight, and he became a pharmacist. And he, I never was able to learn much about his life in the Ukraine because he said, "Ask me about the ship I came over on." So I'm sure he had a hard life back there. I learned later on he knew how to drive a horse-drawn carriage, so that is certainly somebody from a rural area. And so, he was very proud to be on that boat and then see the Statue of Liberty in the bottom left foreground.
And I think that I can see here there's almost a ship out in the distance, correct?
Yes. Mhm.
And tell me about these numbers. What are they?
Well, okay, that's commercial fabric. So I made a montage in that color palette for the background. So I think it's probably a bingo card, but it seemed to blend in with the color scheme.
And I have to ask you again,
Yeah.
because these are so impactful that it makes me wonder how much do you know what you're doing when you're doing this, and how
Okay.
much is spontaneous?
Okay, well, I would say the background, which is the first layer, I'm laying out to begin with, and then I always do a sketch. And I believe I made a template, a pattern for the ship and for Ellis Island, and then start constructing the individual elements and layering them in. And then the lines, I used like crochet thread to create the lines of that you would see in the ship, and try to tie it all together.
It's really what you do is so masterful and requires so much forethought and then execution. This is why I said that it's really exquisite.
Thank you.
So tell me about this and this house.
Okay. Okay, so now we're back to Bloom Where You Are Planted. Um, I did a series of work about all the different geographical locations in San Luis Obispo County, which is extremely varied. It's so varied that the weather report is called the microclimate report, because you could literally drive a couple of miles and it's foggy or it's sunny or hot, cold. So Nipomo, which is one of the Native American tribes of the area, is a very big agricultural area where they have planted a lot of eucalyptus trees, which are not native to this area, but they thought they could use the wood for railroad ties and ship masts. I don't know that that was very successful, but so the tree is dominant, and the rectangle you see at the bottom is part of the quilt coming off the main part, just because I just made that decision. And then in the lower right is the Dana Adobe, which was one of the first adobes or stops on the Pacific Railroad as it was coming through California. This is rather large. I would say this is probably well over 50 inches, maybe 60 inches wide.
I absolutely love these leaves that hang down and they sort of arrest your eye
Mm.
in front of this backdrop, which again alludes to your topographical interest
Mhm.
and the map
Mhm.
layout.
Okay.
Talk about your this is part of your series, correct?
Correct. So another part of our area, also within eucalyptus trees in Pismo Beach, there is a monarch butterfly preserve or reserve. And every year, usually they come up from Mexico at the end of December and come up and rest in this grove, and then go on up north from there. I think I remember hearing they only live about 42 days or something, but they're just magnificent. This is a piece that I did in all silk, which the only one I've done like that. But I took photos of the butterflies and printed them on fabric and then embellished them. And I do like how the eye does move through this piece.
Definitely. And assisted by these beautiful lines that kind of bisect it and create continuity between the quadrants. But
Mhm.
now for something completely different.
Okay. Yes,
Ellen gets political.
yeah, I got this is my political series. I tend to say the idea came to me in the shower. This was when Paul Ryan was Speaker of the House, and he refused to bring the topic of gun safety to the floor for even a discussion, and it just outraged me. And I was a member of Mothers Demand, which is Shannon Watts founded this group um, to address the gun issue in the US. And so I had fabric printed up. I in Photoshop, I took some automatic images of automatic weapons and laid it out in Photoshop, and then had it printed up at Spoonflower, and I recreated the Capitol with these gun images. And it's one of these things where I don't really need to tell you, what's going on here, tell you about my methodology, but I feel like this is my signature piece. At that time, I'd say about 2016, a group of women put together a show called Threads of Resistance. And I was one of only 50 people whose work was chosen. And this Threads of Resistance toured the US for 2 years. And I was just really glad a lot of people got to see it.
It's awesome. And it,
Thanks.
it leads us into another piece that you did,
Mhm.
again, alluding to freedom and fairly self-evident in terms of what it's trying to say.
Mhm.
So I want to, oh, I just love the different patterns that you've used in her dress.
Mm,
And I want to keep going because we have a lot of questions. So I
sure.
want to keep moving through. This is your Watts Tower piece, and I'm
Yeah.
glad you gave us a photo of it.
Yes,
And
so this is the LA series I'm working on now. And Watts Towers was built by Simon Rodia in South Los Angeles in his spare time. And there's rebarb and china and just concrete and all kinds of things. It's just fascinating. And it's now owned by the city of Los Angeles to preserve it. So I'm doing a series. There's 4 altogether, but I'm showing 2 of them here. It's just back in art school even inspired me. So I just think it's magnificent. And on the right-hand side, the wall is comprised of all my clippings of thread.
I love it. I love that. And speaking of LA,
Yeah,
so we have the concert hall here.
yeah. The Disney Concert Hall, designed by Frank Gehry, and my second mentor Natalia Korover, has inspired me to use single-use plastic in my work, rather than having it go to a landfill. So and since the building's made of stainless steel, this foil packaging material was perfect for that.
Now here we're going to enter the series of your of homes that you've embarked upon. And
Yes.
this one was a commission.
Yeah, this is my friend's house in Port Townsend, Washington, Robin High. And you'll see the aerial view. Oh, and I also use dryer sheets. So the green fabric is considered non-woven material. I paint that and embroidered it, and it's a beautiful place outside of Seattle called Port Townsend. And this is my most recent home portrait. My aunt and uncle lived across the street from these folks who lived in this Tudor home for 50 years, and they were moving out, and she asked if I'd do a portrait of their home so they could remember it by. And they had a koi pond in the back, but I put it in the front and found an antique map online of the original layout of Shaker Heights. So now it's hanging in their home, and I'm
It's
happy.
beautiful.
Thanks.
I have to thank you so much for the tour you've given us of your incredible work. We have lots of questions for you. And while you take those questions, I'm going to show everyone, these are the books that Ellen has produced. There's Stitching Slow and Stitching Judaica. And I have these books and they're incredible. Celebrating the Jewish holidays shows a lot, every page has a work of Ellen's and a story. Happy Hanukkah, it's for kids, but it's also for adults because it's her work. And also Stitching Slow is all the beautiful full page illustrations that she did of the area. I mean, they're stunning. So I'm showing you these books because you can buy them from Ellen. They're great. They make great gifts, and I'm very happy to have mine. And now I'm going to take some questions for that, of which I have many. So let me pose them to you. How long do your pieces on average take to complete?
Okay, because I don't work on one piece at a time, I follow my muse, so I usually say, I would say a month, or possibly longer, possibly shorter, but a month would be about average, since I'm kind of flitting around from project to project.
That's a lot. That's so. Do you work on more than one at once?
Yes.
Okay, so the mood as the mood seizes you, you say today I'm in a mood for a pomegranate.
Exactly. Right. I might be coming up with an idea, putting it together. I might be sewing on machine, sewing by hand, cutting fabric, uh, wherever I'm led.
Okay, so that leads me to a question about that. There was a question about the fabric. Did you treat the fabric that you used pomegranate juice on prior to printing to keep it color stable?
Good question. There is a powder, and I can't think of the name of it, that's used before printing with natural dye or other dye, like with the ice dyeing. I can't think of the name of it right now, but it's a white powder and it helps prepare the fabric to accept the color. So that's a great question.
So the next question is, how can you
Oh
clean?
my gosh, somebody just wrote soda ash. Thank you. It's called soda ash.
Okay, I didn't see that in the text. I guess you have your chat open, which I
Oh,
said don't
I
do.
don't think I do, but anyway, go on.
How can you clean the pomegranate quilts, or would you? Would you ever have an occasion to clean these?
No, not really. I mean, it's not like you're gonna wear it. It's a piece of art. I mean, I suppose you could vacuum it, but I've never really, it's not necessary because it's a piece of art. I do tell people do not hang it where it's going to get direct sunlight. That would not be good.
So tell us a bit more about the Monday group. I remember you mentioned the Monday group, and I
Yeah.
also meant to ask you about that. What is the Monday group?
Yeah, the Monday Club
Right.
is, they have a building here that was built in the 30s. Architect was Julia Morgan, and local women members run it and raise money through different philanthropic efforts to to keep the building in good shape because it constantly needs attention. And they donate books to children who could use them, and they also have scholarships for art students, and they give back to the community, and a very lovely group of women.
Do any of the women in the Monday Club have roots or heritage connected to the facility?
Not that I'm aware of. I'd have to ask their historian, but because a lot of people come here to retire, and the women just really come from all over. So some maybe grew up here and others are transplants.
Okay, so now I have questions about the future for you. What is next for you? Are you excited about any new projects or techniques?
Okay. Yes, I'm currently taking a class from a woman artist named Wen Redman and talk about combining techniques. My goodness. I'm oh, gosh, doing things in Photoshop, running them on what she calls substrate, various materials through the printer, praying it doesn't jam, and painting on it, printing on it, just mixed media is what I call it. But I'm looking. Oh, okay. I will say, okay. Besides that, I'm just finishing up a project for um, the Warner Grand Theater in San Pedro, which is a nonprofit to keep, it was one of the three Warner Brothers theaters, and they are constantly putting money into it to keep it alive. And I'm going to have an online auction like I did with the Monday Club. I did 8 pieces of all the landmarks in San Pedro. And so I'm finishing that up, and then I'm going to be looking for my next nonprofit to partner with. That inspires me.
Excellent. So the last question would be, how would you say your work has evolved over time? So when you
Hmm.
think back to when you started to how you approach things now, what would you say would be the primary driver? Would you say you're fearless now?
Yes, good word. No, I would say confident, because I have my techniques down. I'm open to learning new things. I think it took me a long while, well into my adulthood, to say I'm confident as an artist. And I mean, certainly you honoring me with this presentation is builds my self-esteem in that area. But the feedback, as an artist, you work alone, and then being able to share my work and hear people's feedback, appreciation, and so forth, it builds the confidence, and it's just like a great headspace I love being in. I'm most happy when I'm creating.
Well, we're happy that you are such an amazing creator. And I don't just say that, I mean it. And I want to thank you so much on behalf of Art and Scroll Studio, on behalf of the American Guild of Judaic Art, for taking time to help put together this presentation, to working with me collaboratively. I think that I know that everybody was astonished by your work.
Hmm, thank you so much. Um, Can I do my thank yous now?
It's your moment, girl.
Okay, well, Shelley, I'm sorry you live 1,700 miles away, but I really made a new friend in you, and just thanks a million for everything. And thank you to the Guild, and thank you to Valerie Goodwin and Natalia Korover, my mentors, and my friends. My friends, and my husband is the head of my PR wing. He's just always finding about people he's telling about me, which is so lovely. And I'm just very blessed with good family and friends.